And welcome back. So far this hour, we've taken a look at the politics of impeachment and also what is next when it comes to the process. We also heard Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham saying that they were frankly totally in the tank for the president. Now, none of this sitting well with Democrats, as you'd imagine. Just take a listen to what Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff, of course, these men, two prominent positions in the process to this point, heads of judiciary and the intelligence committees, respectively.
They have to pledge to do impartial justice. And here you have the majority leader of the Senate, in effect the foreman of the jury, saying he's going to work hand in glove with the defense attorney. That's a violation of the oath that they're about to take, and it's a complete subversion of the constitutional scheme.
I think we see clearly what's going on here with the comments of Lindsey Graham and others, and that is they don't want the American people to see the facts. They realize what's been presented in the House is already overwhelming, but that there's more damning evidence to be had. And they don't want the American people to see that. And I think that's disgraceful.
House Democrats just released a 658-page report explaining their decision to move ahead with impeachment. I'm going to read now a portion of that document. Quote, Trump ignored and injured our national security when he corruptly abused the powers of his office for personal political gain. The articles charge that President Trump has placed his personal political interest above our national security, our free and fair elections, and our systems of checks and balances. He is engaged in a pattern of misconduct that will continue if left unchecked. Accordingly, President Trump should be impeached and removed from office. My next guest, he is one of 17 Watergate prosecutors who recently penned a piece in the Washington Post saying Trump should be impeached. Richard Davis, he joins us now. He's also former Assistant Secretary of Treasury as well. Richard, as always, good to talk to you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
In a minute, I'm going to give a reminder to where the public pulse was for folks when Watergate was going on at both the House level and finally when it went to the Senate. But in terms of the process, you've heard here what some of the leading Republicans and important figures in the Senate, how they're approaching this, working directly with the administration and also seemingly making up their mind, even though they're to be one of the jurors. Was that very different than what you ran into when you were laying out the case for impeachment in Watergate?
There is some big differences. Well, for sure, in 1974, leading up to the release of the final tape, which blew any ability for anybody to defend Richard Nixon because it had him on tape ordering a cover-up, there was still some Republican support for impeachment. In the House, when they took votes in the committee on the articles of impeachment, 8 of 19 Republicans voted for at least one article. And that doesn't mean that there wasn't an overwhelming support until that final tape among Republicans for the president, but it does show a very different tone. I think that it was taken by everybody in a way more seriously, and now I think it's just viewed certainly by the Republicans, and some are arguing by the Democrats too, but I think clearly by the Republicans as it's just part of partisan politics, and they're not going to pay attention to the facts.
I found this interesting. Obviously, you knew these numbers, Richard, but to give an idea of the public, the skepticism, healthy skepticism at the beginning of the Watergate investigation until finally the president stepped down. In June of '73, when the hearings started, less than 1 in 5 people wanted Nixon to be impeached. By early '74, the number went up to 38%. Then by the summer of '74, more than half wanted the president removed from office. In fact, comparatively, at this stage, when it was going presumably up to the Senate, there's a greater percentage of the American public that wants the president both impeached and removed than was at this stage during Watergate. But yet there was the promise, at least, that more evidence and more testimony would come when it went to the Senate. Now it seems that it's rigged almost before it begins.
Well, one thing that happened in the Watergate, it was a series of deaths, by 1,000 cuts. You had, the break-in, and that really didn't get people's attention. Then there was the early stages of the revelation of a cover-up. Then there was the notification of the tapes. Then there was the Saturday Night Massacre. Then there were more witnesses. And then, as I say, the final tape. But it was building. The other thing that was interesting is in Watergate, all the people, relevant people testified. I mean, the president's chief of staff, Haldeman, his chief domestic advisor, Ehrlichman, all these people testified in front of the Senate Watergate Committee, and and their testimony and version of events was available to both to the public and to the House Judiciary Committee. Here, you've had obviously some of the career people who very bravely have testified, but the president has blocked testimony from key officials. And I might point out that's even different than what happened in Iran-Contra. In Iran-Contra, President Reagan not only disclosed his own personal diaries relating to the events, but he absolutely allowed all of the relevant officials to testify. So you have a very different thing in terms of evidence, although there is very significant evidence because some people did step forward.
And it's to that point, Richard, where it's interesting. You have conversations, and inevitably the supporters of the president will say, hey, you know what? It was bad, but it wasn't that bad. They got the money at the end of the day. We can certainly debate that. I think the abuse of power, to me at least, empirically clear. I know you and a lot of the other Watergate prosecutors feel the same way. But the obstruction and the consequences of basically saying that there is no more checks and balances, that there isn't a separation of powers. The president gets to decide what he or she will or won't participate in. And in the Times editorial, they called it monarchical immunity. And I think that's a right way to say it. Whether people acknowledge it or not, if this is allowed to go forward, we've changed the rules in terms of having co-equal branches of government.
That's why it'll be interesting what happens at a trial, and if there is the ability to call witnesses, because you'll have the chief justice there to call balls and strikes on the spot. If there's an invocation of executive privilege, he could say, wait a second, if this is covering up a crime, there's sufficient evidence that it links to a crime, I'm not going to recognize that privilege. So if there's the ability to call witnesses at the Senate, you may be able to cut through some of the obstruction that has taken place at the House level, where not only have they not allowed, not only have they invoked executive privilege, but they've said people don't even have to show up and directed them not to even show up, which is really, I think, indefensible.
To that end, I also come back to, people think, well, you never know, where's the line, where does it start, where does it stop? You don't want to weaponize impeachment. Certainly, I understand that argument. But to me, Richard, the Founding Fathers, again, in unbelievable foresight, they laid out this very concern as a high crime and a misdemeanor. Madison laid it out specifically about foreign involvement and interference in our elections and the real concerns attached to that. And that's why they had the foresight to put in an impeachment and broadly high crimes and misdemeanors, because you couldn't identify to the T exactly what it would be. But this is the very kind of thing they were afraid of.
And if you look at the legislative history of the impeachment clause and the things that they were very concerned about at the time of the Constitutional Convention, right at the top of the list was foreign interference in our domestic affairs and foreign interference in elections. That was a fundamental concern. And I think this question of a weaponizing impeachment, let's remember, with all the ads Tom Steyer put on the air for 2 years, there was no serious movement towards impeachment. Even after the Mueller report, while there was many who desired impeachment to proceed, it wasn't moving forward. It took this event, which was so clear, so simple, easy to explain, and went to the core, as you were suggesting, of the things that the founders were concerned about, that led to this impeachment as we're facing right now. So I don't think that this is a situation where the Democrats in the Congress just rushed off to impeachment just to undo an election.
Last thing, having watched how this has played out to this point, assuming, as we all do, that this will move through the House with a full floor vote and it'll get to the trial phase in the Senate, do you have any reason for optimism that either Roberts will come in as the Chief Justice and really not only call balls and strikes fairly, but also that we may hear from some witnesses that we haven't heard to this point that would really be additive, that, Senate basically does their job and it's a real trial?
Well, first, I think Chief Justice Roberts, while I might disagree with him on many of his opinions, he's an institutionalist. He very much believes that it's important to preserve the integrity of the court. So I think he will preside fairly. In terms of witnesses, I believe that the one witness who could, and we don't know for sure till he would testify, could impact this is John Bolton. His chief aide, one of his chief aides, Fiona Hill, testified very powerfully, providing evidence supporting impeachment in terms of the facts that she presented. If he testified in a similar way, I don't know that that's going to cause 20 senators, Republican senators, to change their mind, but I think it could change the political dynamic.
Richard Davis, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, everyone, when we come back, we will bring back the panel, and also we'll discuss the president and the attorney general's attacks on the FBI. Even James Comey admits mistakes were made and there were problems with the Russia probe. But the continued attacks on our institutions, many argue, is beyond the pale, and it's not only deeply disturbing, but it's deeply dangerous. That's not coming from me. That's from career intelligence officials. We'll get into that after this.